CSwafford, and today I'll be speaking about different leadership characteristics, styles, approaches, my own personal reflections, and I'm going to be reporting on my own personal leadership strengths. What makes an effective leader? Effective leaders recognize and entrench themselves in organizational culture. That's is in the way in which people behave within an organization. This informs our views on leadership theory and observable patterns. Effective leaders focused on strengths as opposed to weaknesses, and they're also very self-aware. This strength-based leadership approach is also known as positive philosophy, and the goal is to positively impact culture and diffuse negative aspects. So that might be using a little bit of like an effective command of when someone is bringing negative energy and interactions to a group and knowing when to call the shots of, how to end that. But also recognizing that in yourself. And that's what I mean by being self-aware, is you have to know and self-regulate. It's important that leaders build teams and recognizing themselves where there's these 4 domains of strength. And remember, we're not focusing on weaknesses. We're trying to develop our strengths across the board. And we can't be all of these things at once. And so our goal is to find a team or develop members of a team so that all 4 of these domains are being hit. And in that way, effective leaders learn to develop talent through work, practice, and knowledge acquisition. We hope to, gain this knowledge for ourselves, but also share this knowledge in hopes to encourage talent. And, when we see innate talent and then we invest in it and then develop it even more so. And like I said, this takes a layer of effective command, because when we acknowledge our strengths, we're also recognizing our weaknesses. One of my favorite authors, Angela Duckworth, came up with the grit equation, and that's talent times effort equals skill. And then you take that skill times effort and equals success. I like to be remembered because this can be applied to not just yourself, but to your family, your children, and of course your work team. And that's just saying that effort is like worth twice as much as just, an innate talent. Like, it has to be developed, it has to be practiced over time. In recognizing your leadership style and having that self-awareness, you have to, everyone has a unique set of strengths and beliefs. And we have to acknowledge that and honor that. And it helps to understand these motivations because it builds towards our leadership philosophy. And that's like our own biases, our background experiences in life and in the workplace that come together to build our overall relationship philosophy. And so from here on out, I'll be covering of the aspects of leadership philosophy and how that's built on a personal level. In the 1960s, Douglas McGregor came up with the theory X and the theory Y. Uh, he was an MIT professor, and he came from a human relations approach to management. And his main idea was like how beliefs shaped behavior. With theory X, the basic assumptions are that the average person inherently dislikes work. They find it distasteful. The average person inherently needs to be directed and controlled. If they're not directed, then they wouldn't accomplish anything, just, given their own means. Or they would just do the minimal work required and just to get it over with. And the average person wants security and not responsibility. They just want to be directed, been told what to do, and the workday's over. The way that leaders and managers perceive their workers using the Theory X approach is typically pretty negative, because it influences their management styles. They tend to micromanage, control. They rarely delegate, and in organizations where Theory X is like their main approach, it's typically very centralized. There's not a lot of incentive for employee initiatives and ideas to come forward. And, it works well in some areas. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But, typically overall, worker satisfaction is pretty low in Theory X settings. Now, the Theory Y has basic assumptions, which are like just the opposite of Theory X. The average person does not inherently dislike work. They enjoy it. They find satisfaction in it. The average person is self-motivated. If they're in a supportive environment, then they are in their given responsibility, they're going to come through. They're going to pull through with that. And the average person will thrive in a positive environment. They just find work rewarding and satisfying for their own sake and not just out of necessity. That internal motivation, and they want to complete tasks well, as long as they're supported. And it's found that people do really well in these positive environments. And where their skills end up being appreciated. Theory Y managers, they hold optimistic views of their teams and the work they do. And typically the organizations that follow Theory Y are more decentralized, and there's an emphasis on trust and collaboration. With Kurt Lewin, he developed the 3 leadership styles. He was the father of social psychology and more of like a values-driven leadership style. His work became popularized in the 1930s and 1940s, coming out of like the robber barons, and people, they're reimagining what leadership and workers, how teams work. So in the authoritarian style, leadership style, it's definitely more of a Theory X approach and more hands-on for management. They motivate by strict rules and penalties. They have the final say, and the leader decides the goals, the metrics, and the objectives, and when there should be completion. They like to limit employee-to-employee communication. They demand compliance, more of like a carrot and a stick approach. And it can be constructive where employees need more guidance or there's more standard operating procedures like the military. But in a lot of settings, in the wrong settings, it can have a negative impact on creativity and motivations, and it can be subject to abuse, and there can be a power vacuum because they're not getting feedback from their employees. Style of leadership is definitely more of a Theory Y approach. It's more hands-on in as for leadership as opposed to like a management style, also known as like participatory leadership, it's where they're open to the team's opinions and input while utilizing their talents. It can be constructive in the right settings. Typically, employees love working this way when they have like the responsibilities and they're supported. And it's more of like a long range view instead of like a short term view like the authoritarian where it's just objective to objective. Democratic leadership focuses on long term employee development. Um, of course, the final decision is always with the leader, but the leader believes that people can find value in the work that they do and they can work effectively on their own as long as they're supported. This typically can yield higher levels of productivity. There's intellectual stimulation, creativity is flowing, confidence is up, and people feel like they belong and they enjoy being at work with a supportive leader. It can be negative in the form of like time management because there's a lot of meetings. You have to go through the feedback and deciding whether or not to do uh, taking the input from employees. Um, and therefore it can like reduce productivity. This is fair leadership style. You don't come across it too often personally. I've been in that situation before, but it's where you're neither commanding nor nurturing. There's very minimal regulation of the team, and the leader exerts like minimal influence over the team. They basically say, here's the objective, here's everything you need to get the job done, have at it. Just have it on my desk or in my inbox by this time. Otherwise, I'll leave you alone to it. It's really good for like engineers or creatives and experts or people an expert in their fields. So it can be constructive in the right setting, but typically, given has a negative impact on motivation from just basic lack of direction. Two main approaches. There's transactional versus transformational. In the transactional approach, it's very structured exchanges. It's very task focused, high monitoring, very X theory coded. There's rewards for compliance and there's penalties for non-compliance. It's more of like the carrot and the stick. It's really good for when there's like really clearly defined roles. There's nothing ambiguous about it. So with the transformational approach, you inspire your team to be self-motivated. You empower your followers with a vision. You're really compelling about it. You can articulate it. You encourage growth and development, very Y-coded, and you're really focused on like long-term development and relationships. Throughout this unit and through previous courses, have found that I do lead more towards authoritarian just because I have, expectations and, but I aim to be a transformational leader. I feel like a lot of it is just situational. It depends on the environment that I'm in. I did my strengths profile, and my top number one was love. I value people. I have really close relationships with friends and loved ones and stay in touch. And I care. I come from a place of compassion with people. I'm very honest with people, very blunt. Um, but I do so with kindness. I believe that they can go hand in hand. And I can have a funny delivery about it. I am really brave. I'm not really afraid of a lot of things. Sometimes I have self-doubt, but I just keep trucking on. And I do appreciate beauty and excellence. I am an artist. I can see art in other people and in the way that they express themselves. So I would say, like, overall, I do agree with my top five here. So these are six, seven, eight, nine, and 10. Social intelligence. I've worked in the public for decades at this point. I've been a bartender, so I can spot a person from across the room and get a really excellent read on them. I am pretty fast, pretty astute on that. I am kind of like disappointed that leadership was all the way down at 7, and that's something I hope to boost throughout the course and throughout the time it takes for me to get my degree. But like I said, I lead from a place of compassion and understanding, which I think is very strong for a leader to have, especially as someone that wants to lean more into a theory why type of leader. I am very grateful. I have a lot of hope, and I would say I have pretty good judgment and being able to take lessons from even the smallest things. Everything's a learning experience. And I feel like it would be prudent of me to give my bottom five of my strengths profile. Prudence, being careful about one's choices, not taking undue risk. I will say this, like, I feel like I am very good at making decisions, but I don't like to have something pinging around in my head. Like, I will pull a trigger on making a decision pretty much in a moment's notice. And self-regulation, I'm going to say, yeah, I could work on that. A lot of that has to do with my ADHD. My teamwork was pretty low, but I think that that's probably influenced by the fact that I've worked pretty much solo for almost the last 10 years. Definitely humility is right there at the bottom. I will sing my own praises just because I'm really proud of where I come from and where I'm at and where I'm headed. So, yeah, that was a great exercise, and it gives a lot of room for self-reflection.